serious? People who won inherited a lot of money. What are your horror stories from people begging for your money? My grandmother had an education fund made for me and put money in it every month. I was pretty young and my mom was poor and wanted to use that money to buy pot and cigarettes and other stuff. She kept bugging me and bribing me with stuff. I told my grandmother, who made sure my mom couldn't access the account. I wish my grandparents would have done that. My dad gained control of my college fund when my grandpa died. Instead of saving it for when I went to college, he used to live off of so he wouldn't have to work. When it came time for me to apply for college, there was $100 left in the account that started with about $30,000. It's something I never forgave him for. Family coming out of the woodwork threatening to sue for the money. Family have surprise visits and looked like they thought I hid the money in the house somewhere. No amount of telling them we inherited less than $500 would make them go away. They did not believe it. Now they all just hate us and I no longer get invited to family outings. I deal with wills and estates professionally. It's incredibly sad how often ill feelings develop within families where an inheritance is concerned, even when the estate is modest. When my grandmother died, she left money to pay for my entire college education, including graduate school. At the time, it seemed that all my friends needed money. So, to be true to my grandmother's wishes, I said nothing about the inheritance and paid for those college years as she intended. If I had done otherwise, they would have begged me for money for a variety of needs. I had most of my college paid for through scholarships and a fund my parents set up when I was a baby. My roommate junior year would always bring this up as an excuse to not pay for things. Example, well, you have a college fund so you should pay for my dinner too. I have to take out loans so you should pay for my rent this month. I ended up moving out and avoided her for the rest of my time at school. My grandpa was pretty well off and he suddenly died of undiagnosed prostate cancer a decade or so ago. The kids from his second marriage immediately swooped in and started claiming everything as theirs, despite us being just as close to him as they were. It ended with a lawsuit and the family being split in half, with us not regarding them as family anymore. We ended up getting basically nothing and I'm frankly not impressed with how it was handled by either side. It's really sad seeing people you've known your whole life acting like that and ruining decades of being family in a couple weeks. I was lucky enough to have very successful grandparents. I am also lucky enough to still have all of my grandparents at the age of 31. They are all over 82. The grandfather of importance to this conversation only has an 8th grade education, but he built a strong business, water well drilling, when each of his 7 grandchildren were born. He deposited $87,000 the year I was born. I assume that's the same for the others, into a managed trust. We don't make a habit of discussing money, but there are a few requirements. Namely, I won't have complete control over it until I'm 50. I get a statement every fall and I knew my retirement is taken care of. What happened when I told my spouse? We dated for 3 years, been together 8, and it was close to 3 years before I even mentioned it. Aside from my spouse, it's no one's business. Why on earth would I tell people of my impending windfall? Be smart, people. Keep your bank accounts out of conversation. I inherited a fair amount of money when my grandfather passed away. My husband and I were planning on using it to purchase our first house. We had been saving, but clearly could have a much lower mortgage with this windfall. Well, my husband works a side business where he built custom vehicles. One friend who was running out of money and his car was only about halfway done found about the inheritance only because we stupidly asked his advice on mortgage options and decided he was going to pull his car because he didn't have the funds to finish it and then sue us for $10,000, and unfortunately we got a lawyer and ended up spending over $3,500 to have him say that the customer usually is right and we'd be further ahead to just settle and pay him, because the lawyer fees would be much more if we continued to fight. Breaks my heart to this day that a good chunk of my inheritance went to pay that big dig bag off so he could take his vehicle somewhere else to get it finished. My grandmother has dementia and her husband is dying of cancer. They have over $1 million in assets that have been divided between 4 sons. One son is a mentally ill junkie who has been in and out of jail. He has already been promised their house as his share of inheritance, but he has been doing all he can to get more from his mother while her husband has been in the hospital slowly dying the last few months. He steals her credit cards, opens new ones in her name, and attempts to access their money through online banking. My step-grandfather is trying to get her declared mentally incompetent to prevent my uncle from manipulating her finances, but between his health issues and being in and out of the hospital it is proving difficult. When her husband dies, which will unfortunately be soon, he plans on moving into their house, which he already sees as his, and most likely milking my grandmother dry. The sad part is she has dementia and has no idea what is going on. A few years ago we inherited some money from my husband's grandfather. My husband's brother and sister also inherited equal amounts. His sister, we had not spoken to in several years, emailed my husband and his brother asking for their portion of the inheritance because her part-time personal trainer job wasn't enough to keep funding her lifestyle. Lol. I have a similar story. We inherited money from my husband's great aunt. Each grandchild in the family got equal amounts. His sister asked us to give her $10,000 from our portion because she had kids and we didn't. It stung because she knew we were struggling with infertility. I am fortunate that my father's family is well off. Everything is locked into trust funds since my grandparents' death. Now my father has died, I have control over my father's share. My uncle, who is a weed dealing, smoking, in and out of jail, never held a job, dropkick son of a loving woman who always have him hand, and brother to my father who tried to help support him even though he was sick for many years. Anyways, I have withdrawn my share because that family sucks at financial management and I have reinvested it in my own trust. Well, uncle has started calling me monthly from jail asking for help with labors or to pay for something. He still has living brothers, but he thinks a girl 3 times younger than him should be supporting him because he can't get a job and I am family. I feel nothing for the man who has thrown his life away and leeched off my father in his last years. I am glad though. Better than him harassing my mum. Edit. For those saying change your phone number, he has my work phone number. If I were to change it, it is a lot more hassle than he deserves. Clients. Explanation. Business cards. Directories. It's easier to take me off his approved call list in jail. That way when he is out and contacts me, at least I know he is out of jail. Also, I know this is under a question about horror stories, but really, I got this. No need to offer obvious advice. I won a lawsuit settlement after almost dying in a fire. I was under 18 at the time of the incident but was 18 when it finally settled. My mother told me unless I gave her half of my settlement, I would have to find a new place to live. I was in my senior year of high school when this happened. She said she deserved it because she was the only one in my life who was always there for me. I didn't give her the money. She kicked me out and tried to keep some of my personal belongings, not like I had much since everything was lost in the fire. We didn't talk for months until she randomly showed up at my house one day. She asked me for rent money and gave me some BS sob story. I wrote her a check for $5,000 hoping it'd make her go away. It did for a time. She and I barely spoke until years later when I was pregnant. A few years ago I was in a bad car accident, hit by an 18-wheeler, and got some money. I told no one, especially my mom. She has insisted numerous times I was entitled to a settlement for it and should speak to a lawyer she found. She took it upon herself to talk to lawyers on my behalf, or tried to. I just ignored her for months until she finally gave it up. I didn't inherit a lot. But back in the early 90s when my brother and I were in elementary school, my parents were trying to buy a house. They couldn't afford the down payment, so they asked if they could borrow our bonds, $5,000 each, and repay us later. They got the house, but I never saw that money again. It was something our grandparents gave us for college one day. Wow, sounds like my parents. I love them. But whenever we were struggling financially they asked to use our birthday money from our family members. I gave them quite a bit, couple hundred, for a kid and never saw any of it again. A part of me wonders if that was actually used for bills or for gambling money. Thankfully though, my dad hasn't gambled in years and they're much more stable and smart with their finances. Even more pathetic because it was so little money, Grandma lived off her pension after selling her house way cheap to Aunt. After she died, other aunt divided up her money and stuff. I think each grandkid got $1,000. One piece of her inexpensive furniture. A few little things. None of it worth any money. But cousin Kay, whose parents got a super cheap house that she keeps saying she wants, carried on about how she was promised everything. She wanted the 10-year-old freezer her sister with little kids got. She wanted the dishes. She wanted. 10 years later, I avoid talking to her because I'm sure I'll still hear about all of grandma's valuables that other aunt threw away. I think the rest of us should have just gone in together. Said. Take one thing then someone else's turn and we all would have left after round 2 and left the rest for cousin K to take everything else and saved ourselves a lot of accusations. My dad has 2 sisters. One of them was an out of control mess that after stealing and making her parents' life hell they finally had to cut her out of their lives. My grandma died and she didn't even bother coming to the funeral. My grandpa ended up in a memory care facility which blew through the last of what they had saved up, and then my dad and his other sister took over the payments. When he passed away they had paid over $70,000 combined for him to live in a nice facility for the last years of his life. After he died the mess of a sister suddenly showed up demanding her share of the inheritance, assuming that it would be a large sum of money. They sent her a bill for 1/3 of the $70,000. I actually didn't inherit anything at all because my mom died broken in debt. But I have a few grand in donations for a spot at her cemetery, still haven't decided what spot we want. My sister found out and keeps asking me for money from the donation fund. I sent her $100 just because I know she lives in the middle of butt nowhere. Then she keeps asking for $40 here and there. When I tell her no she later posts of a photo of her smoking weed up. Ah yes. I'm sure you really needed that money for groceries. It's quite pathetic. She doesn't even realize how expensive the cemetery spot is. We don't even have enough to cover a decent spot at all. Friend of mine didn't even win any lottery. She finally got approved for disability benefits after years of jumping through bureaucratic hoops. Almost immediately, her family descended like vultures, demanding money for this or that. They didn't believe her that benefits in this case basically means the bare minimum necessities to not die of starvation. They thought she was sitting on a nest egg of thousands and started screaming at her and calling her a liar when she said she was actually broke after one trip to the grocery store. First of all, who the duck screams at a disabled person demanding money? Second, why the duck do they think she owes them a single ducking dime? Even if she was rich, when they can't even give her a ducking ride to the doctor without demanding gas money. I told her to tell them all to go duck themselves with a fire hydrant. But she's too nice. That probably answers the questions above. When my grandmother died, my uncle asked my grandfather for his classic car worth about $30,000. My grandfather turned him down because he knew he would just sell it. He offered it to my father, but my father said no. Luckily, my grandfather still has it. I need to call him and convince him to give it to my cousin, my sister or me. Because other than my dad, we are the only ones who won't sell it. Hell, I still have my great grandparents' car that I won't sell. It looks like shit, but it runs and I'm slowly working in it. When my great grandmother passed, she left her house to my grandmother and my mother in her will. My grandmother is still alive, but all 5 of my mother's siblings recently learned that when my grandmother does pass, the house will go to my mom. They fight with her constant. Try to trick her and harass her into moving out when she's the only one out of 6 that take care of my grandmother, who is blind, partially disabled and has kidney problems. And a few of them have even said that as soon as my grandmother dies, They're taking my mom to court to take the house away. Little do they know my mother doesn't want the house. She wants to sell it so she can move closer to her grandkids. But she said it might be easier to let her siblings fight over it and tell them to duck themselves. These people also tried to have me arrested for stealing my grandmother's $30,000 settlement from a car accident because I happened to buy a $23,000 car the week before she got the money. When I was diagnosed with cancer, my job took up a collection for me. They were very generous and it grew to a fair amount of money, which we used throughout my treatment so that we didn't worry about bills and whatnot. My sister found out about the money and began to ask for money, never once offering help, but always having a sob story about why she needed the cash. When lied and said the money was gone, she stopped calling altogether. Oh, and when I was a toddler, my mom passed in a car accident. I had bonds given to me from family friends to help me later in life. My aunt who adopted me cashed all the bonds before I even finished elementary school, leaving me with nothing. Not directly related, but my wife is from a wealthy family, and I'm not. I never accepted any money help from her parents and managed to build a decent career by myself. The problem is that all my friends think that all my achievements are because YOUHAVERRHWEFEN. I'll share my current nightmare that started right before my mom died. My mother was an alcoholic who ended up dying of liver failure last May. After my mom died, we opened the estate with the state of PA to begin the process of going through her finances and transferring the deed from her house to me. As soon as my info was registered with the state, every realtor came out of the woodwork to harass me about selling her property. I got phone calls, letters. People showed up and wouldn't leave. We had to call the police multiple times on one realtor. I luckily had a great estate lawyer who would hit the people with candies and follow up with the police when they continued to show up. My mom had a townhome in a very desirable neighborhood. It's an easy sale for any realtor, but I was still surprised on the sheer number of realtors who harassed us about it. We still have 2 realtors who stop by our house every once in a while and leave a business card. I have a sign stating that we are not selling taped to our door. A great aunt died when I was about 13. At 18 I was allowed access to the inheritance that she left me in trust. My GF at the time had a lot of debt and managed to leech most of my inheritance and fritter away the rest of it. My friends saw me as a soft touch. I was a bit, and here and there. £100 by £100. The money declined. By the time I was 22 it had all gone. My aunt stole a large sum of money from me. When I turned 18 I was to get a check for 18 years of per cap with interest. 6 months before my 18th, she quit her job and started working at a small 5-location credit union. She asked me to move my accounts there to help her meet quotas since she just started and would do joint accounts so I could get the benefits too. 10 months later I thought she had a better job and was reaping the benefits when she started to remodel her house and spend her nights at the bar. I didn't think anything of it because she was my aunt and had a decent job. When I went to change banks because I was moving across the country, she told me she already withdrew the money and I couldn't get it, and since it was a joint account there was nothing I could do about it. While not fine, the worst thing about it was that she claimed it was what my mother wanted and was in her will. Then when disproved said she deserved it more than me. And then eventually that because she did it in a legal way it was hers now. She convinced her boss that I was trying to ruin her life so I couldn't even go to them for help. Eventually I got 60% of it back from a settlement, but she burned all the bridges she could in the family. She would cut off any contact with people who asked what the problem was, or would threaten to if they talked about it. Since she was getting free childcare from her mom, she said she would rather pay for childcare than listen to her mom talk about me. So my grandmother had to keep quiet or she would lose her other 2 grandkids and her last living daughter along with me because I was moving across the country. Total blindside. Only vaguely related. But my parents think I'm a gold digger for loving my husband who stands to inherit half a mother-in-law when his parents die. I would pay more money than I'll ever see in my life to keep them alive and healthy as long as possible. These people have treated me like family, more than my actual family, and all my parents believe is I'm in it for the money that I guarantee I won't actually see any of, and don't really care about. My parents are ducking trash. My in-laws lived very modestly. He worked blue collar. She was a nurse. They never appeared to have money. But my dad-in-law had inherited a bunch of farmland from his parents. When my in-laws passed, we, along with my brother-in-law, inherited that land. It was rented out to farmers, so it was extra income every year. But we finally decided to sell it. It was a lot of land and we made a small fortune on it. There really isn't anyone left on my husband's side of the family, and my side thinks my husband's side was poor and beneath them. We never told them about the land or the money we got for it. We also live modestly, so no one knows. Knowing my family, that's for the best. Okay, I didn't win money, but I did win 5 boxes of caramel apple pops, about 240 altogether, in middle school, and lem tell you. Word spread fast and it wasn't long before everyone was coming up and asking if they could have won or even a whole box. Even people I didn't know. I am 100% expecting to have a story for threads like this soon. My grandma is 90. In a nursing home. And has at best a couple semi-lucid hours a week. My aunt visits her daily. My mom visits 1-2 times a week. My aunt brought my grandma to her house where she had a lawyer waiting and had my grandma sign a new will. The old will split the money 50/50. We have no idea what the new will says. When my mom asked if she could see the will, my aunt got pissed and told her she never wanted to talk to her again. My grandma doesn't remember signing anything and doesn't even grasp what a will is anymore. We're talking about a decent amount of money here, like hundreds of thousands. My aunt has always been pretty well off. Growing up, she was always the rich relative to me. I have no idea why she'd destroy her relationship with her sister over this. At this point, I'm kind of hoping all the money gets eaten up by medical expenses. My grandma had mineral rights in her name. And when she was on her deathbed, she realized that all her kids were money hungry and entrapped in cycles of abuse. She decided to leave it to all of her grandchildren. And it grew in an account for each of us to take when we turned 18. If you know mineral rights, you know that the money continuously grows. You get a check from an oil company monthly. My aunt was the executor of the estate, only one without kids benefiting. So she got a cut as payment for her work. She is now currently holding up every legal proceeding to try to keep her cut. She was supposed to sign the estate off to us over 3 years ago. But still refuses to do what the will says. Everyone hates that aunt now. When my great aunt had a massive stroke, she was deemed unfit to care for herself due to the after effects, and all her assets we thus put in charge of my grandmother, my mother, and myself. None of the family was particularly awful. It was akin to a tragedy. She was never going to be the same again. Her housekeeper caregiver, on the other hand, was awful. When she found out the assets were in our name, she began to stalk my grandparents. Stalked me on social media. And would routinely call our home numbers demanding a payment of around $10,000 for unpaid services. We asked her what she meant. And she said gas money for buying her groceries and the round trip. Staying longer than she had to finish cleaning. And the late night calls when my great aunt called her to help her up because she had fallen. There was a contract and payment history indicating that she was paid for everything, including overtime and late night calls. Eventually, the harassment got so bad that we all got restraining orders on her. And we haven't heard from her since. Not won or inherited. 30 years of negotiating and settling severe personal injury and wrongful death claims. For both the insurance company, 18 years, and for personal injury law firm, 12 years, and have dispersed large sums of money to literally thousands of people over the 30 years. Can tell you that the one constant when the money is transferred is the fear of others finding out how much they got. They are not happy about getting the money because of the loss incurred. They fear that struggling family member who wasn't a primary heir and the subsequent requests for money. Many have set up a trust or took an annuity payout just to create a buffer between the money and other family members.